Alright, Big Boss here with Foxhound Woodsball coming to you from Fort Lauderdale and from my blog page over at outerheavenpaintball.blogspot.com. I'm also repping my friends over at Acid Tactical. You can check them out at acidtactical.com. Anyway, I know it's been ages since I've done videos like this, but trust me, I've got a lot of shit that I've been working on that's coming down the pipeline. It's been taking me a while. Work, family, you guys know the fucking drill. Now, the video I'm going to be doing is, well, it's going to fall under my Special Forces look series, which I look at classic military units, Special Forces, Spetsnaz, SAS, stuff like that. However, this go around is going to be my generation. Early GWOT. GWOT being Global War on Terror. I'm talking everything from post 9/11 onward, and I'm going to try to keep this concentrated to the earlier days, like from 9/11 onward, from the invasion of Afghanistan, Operation Enduring Freedom, right through to Operation Iraqi Freedom, and even into later operations like Operation Vigilant Resolve, the first battle of Fallujah. Now, bear this in mind. One, I'm not a veteran. I never been in the military or been to those fights, so my scope is purely the history side. I'm looking at this stuff as an observer. Other than that, as a lifelong student of history and as somebody who's a paintball enthusiast, I like the whole cosplay aspect, like our airsoft counterparts. This is for anybody who wants to set up a gear set for these particular scenario games, for those that do know about these scenario games, or they want to set up something unique that catches everyone's attention. Stuff like this is what we need in a sea of the latest and greatest. Your multicam, your Cryptech bullshit, or your high-speed, low-drag crap. It's like, come on. Stand out. Now, we're going to kick this off with a little bit of a history of the wars leading up to Iraq, leading up to the whole 9/11 and everything like that. But first, a word from our sponsors over at acidtactical.com. I will leave links for them in the description to this video. And remember, when the shit hits the fan and you've got to trust your gear with your life, ask yourself this one question. Can your gear survive the acid test? Well, with that being said, let's kick this shit off.
Over the years, Acid Tactical has provided tactical equipment for all aspects of shooting sports, from paintball, airsoft, right down to our military personnel and law enforcement at a fraction of the cost for a name brand item. Our 550 cord slings are professionally made and built solid. They come in both single and 2-point configurations, and you can take our slings straight to hell and back and it will still keep working. It doesn't matter if you want to stand out or blend in. Our professionally made vinyl stencils are just the thing you need to allow you to create that perfect camo paint job or mix it up for a custom design of your own making. This is just a small sampling of the gear we have to offer at Acid Tactical. The market is flooded with tactical gear and accessories of all makes and models the world over. However, when the crap hits the fan, ask yourself this one question. Can your gear survive the acid test?
Okay, let's talk combat uniforms. Now, this is the stuff that defined the American military throughout the global war on terror, and this was a transitional period as well between the older generation, newer generation uniforms, and it's quite frankly an evolution after the 2 decades worth of conflict in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, First uniform sets I have are your classic M81 Woodland BDUs and your 3-color Desert BDUs. These are the two uniforms that are the most predominant for the early years of the global war on terrorism. Basic, no BS on either one in terms of the cut. The Woodland one was my original paintball uniform, and I was pretty much a kid back when I had this stuff. I put on my old Foxhound patch. I had a Army name tape, a McAfee sock patch I slapped on because I thought it was badass for the time. This uniform was pretty much worn in the early days from the 80s right into the early 2000s when the transition to digital uniforms came about. But basic, no BS design, it was an evolution off the jungle fatigues worn during Vietnam, but better materials, and you get the general concept about this. The uniform, on the other hand, the pattern, M81 Woodland, it was an evolution off the RDF ERDL, which was a evolution off the M1948 ERDL camouflage patterns that were used during Vietnam. But as far as the global war on terror goes, the Woodland pattern was used initially when America was beginning its transition to digital camouflages. We used this type of uniform to outfit the Afghan National Army that we were constituting after the Taliban collapse in the early 2002-2003 time frame. However, the uniform, being a woodland camouflage variant, has been copied the world over since the 80s. So this became a security issue for the early Afghan National Army, as Taliban Al-Qaeda operators would wear this uniform, infiltrate the ANA, and cause what is called a green on blue situation. Now, the second uniform here is your tricolor desert. This replaced the 6-color desert by 1993 and was the mainstay for American forces going into Afghanistan in 2001 and into Iraq in 2003. This stuff was pretty much a departure from what we originally had with desert camouflage, as we used sand samples from Saudi Arabia to form the design for the 3-color uniform. And with testing in that area, as well as our experience from Operation Desert Storm, this uniform by 1993 became standard GI issue, though you'll still find its predecessor in the inventory and still being issued as well. However, by the time 2000s rolled around, this was a predominant uniform, and after the fall of Saddam and our transition over to digital patterns, this uniform was licensed off to the Iraqi National Army that we were constructing after the fall of Saddam. Now give me 1 second to pop on the other two, so we'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and as you can see, I got another couple uniforms here. Now we're going to start off with the 6-color desert camouflage. This pattern was developed in the mid to late 1960s as the United States military and government, even though we were embroiled in the Vietnam War at the time, we were preparing to go to Israel's defense during, I think it was the 6-Day War or the Yom Kippur War, I forget which one, but with tensions flaring up in the Sinai Peninsula and with that going on, the United States was preparing to send troops over there to help the Israelis if it was deemed necessary. So the idea was that we'd have a camouflage pattern for the rocky and hilly environment. This pattern was tested in the Sierra Nevada region, Southern California, Utah, and mountainous areas like that. However, sending troops into the Middle East for the Bright Star missions, that wasn't too bad. It was still decent. It was used by multinational force and observers monitoring peace between Israelis and Egyptians. But Operation Desert Storm showed the shortcomings of this particular pattern as it contrasted too greatly with the environment that American troops found themselves operating in. The three color that was previously shown, on the other hand, proved to be more effective, but was still in the testing phases during Operation Desert Storm and was only limited to a select few units that were further behind the lines in Saudi Arabia. However, the six color pattern was still in the American inventory for Somalia in 93. Units were mixing and matching 6 and 3 color desert, and ironically this uniform was still in the inventory by 1998, so there was still some stock left on it even though it was no longer a general issue. This would have been, as far as American troops go, obsolete, but you definitely found some of these as a very rare thing in the American military inventory by the time Operation Iraqi Freedom began. This uniform, however, was shipped en masse to countries in sub-Saharan Africa as part of foreign aid to their governments and militaries, and was the first camouflage used for reconstituted Iraqi military. The other uniform, on the other hand, this is an abortion of a camouflage pattern, I will say that, but it's got its cool factor in there because it was used by 2005-2006 in Iraq. This is your Army combat uniform. This was a finalization of what was called the close combat uniform that the striker teams were screwing around with. As you can see, the pockets on the sleeves, this was done in World War II, used by special forces in Vietnam, became a mainstay because the body armor was becoming more integrated. Velcro is good for the laundering reasons, add and remove patches as needed for SOPs, operational security for special forces. That was all the good stuff. Overabundance on Velcro though in certain areas, but still pretty good. The pattern, on the other hand, horrible by all accounts. Uniform history has a thing about the pattern and their work on and research onto that particular episode. I'm going to be putting links to these into the blog article, so we'll be moving on from this particular pattern right about now. Okay, last two uniforms that I'm going to be discussing. First off is what's called a combat uniform. Now, with some military units, only the top was considered new issue. The combat uniform pants was something more regulated for special operations units. However, this kind of uniform was with special forces early on, as far as 2005, 2006, because of the advancements at the time in body armor and plate carrier technology. A lot of troops are getting overheated from wearing battle fatigues. This uniform became a good idea for those climates and definitely was a must with special operations especially. Now, this one in particular is in M81 Woodland. This would be a mainstay for the U.S. military, especially Special Forces units operating with the Afghan National Army Special Forces, doing operations against Taliban in certain areas of Afghanistan, and was the camouflage pattern that was the uniform of choice for the early MARSOC units, today's Raider battalions. So those Marines were the last to be wearing M81 Woodland. Nice uniform. This one is produced by Han Tactical. I'm still doing a review on that one, so bear with me on that. But generally speaking, it's pretty much the same kind of material used in stuff like Under Armour shirts, that moisture wicking material with the BDU sleeves on it. Definitely a cool thing to have. And now we move on to ABUs, another abortion camouflage pattern, but definitely a cool thing. I like tiger stripes, so a tiger stripe pattern that's semi-pixelated. This was used by the United States Air Force, ironically. And the idea was that the airmen that were more special operations and stuff like that would be using old three-color and woodland, but this became more of the airman barracks uniform. Tiger Stripe Productions that made the stuff, they even wrote an open letter saying that was a fashion statement by the Air Force, because the Army had their ACUs, and the ACUs and ABUs, you could kind of mix and match them because the coloration was that similar. Hell, airmen were using Army load-bearing and Molly gear with their ABUs. That is until Congress had to step in because the services were in a bit of a pissing match, using camouflage as a fashion statement. Then we get into multicams. However, that also was the AOR camouflages. Uniform history did that stuff. I'll digress to that one, but with that being said, that's pretty much military uniforms in general, but I'll pop in with a few other accessories, so give me one moment on that one. Okay, let's talk hats. Now, this one I'm holding here is your basic run-of-the-mill U.S. military issue patrol cap. Pretty common with the Army, Air Force, and but this is pretty much worn more in garrison or in the field if you're doing long-range patrol, special operations type shit. Another one would be your boonie hats. Now, I've got your ACU, also called UCP for Universal Camouflage Pattern, which is the abortion pattern, and this one here is in 6-color desert, chocolate chip. Now, both these hats are going to be genuine Army issued, or Marine Corps, because depending upon the time. Now, all boonie hats, with the exception of a few, are going to have this brim around here. This is what guys use to put in vegetation. Snipers will use it for adding their nets and their ghillie material, stuff like that. However, this would be more for patrol missions, and if you have to move light, a lot of guys wore this stuff on deployment, or they would use it more openly in an actual battlefield if you're special forces, unless they were dressing like local fighters. Now, good hat, good setup. Another example would be this particular one. This one is a desert boonie hat. Now, as you can see, this one lacks the rim of the ACU one. Now, you will find hats in the 6-color online with that same brim as the ACU one, or your woodlands, tiger stripes, stuff like that. However, those hat designs with the brim around it would be more prototype for the 70s, 80s going forward. I'm not sure if those would have been, but it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility if those were used during Desert Storm. However, you will not find it on the 3-color one if you're looking for genuine issue. Keep that one in mind. Now, moving on to another hat. The operator ball cap. Now, baseball hats are kind of a weird thing because you see operators wearing their favorite sports teams. They'll be wearing those kind of hats, and it wasn't for ballistic reasons. It was more psychological, especially in Iraq. Now, this one is a operator ball cap made by Rothko. I put on here a Gadsden flag and a little something back here. Usually it would be a name tape back here for operators, and usually on the front it's a unit patch. It's something that's a tactical ID, your kill placards, flags, stuff like that, or in this case a moto patch or morale patch. But in Iraq, the thing was that if Iraqis saw guys wearing tack gear, body armor, and wearing a hat like this or any kind of baseball cap, it was regarded as those guys were not the guys to trifle with. Those guys were special operations, special forces, and those are the guys that would be looking for a fight. That was the whole thing behind guys wearing baseball caps in the combat zone as a measure of psychological warfare. Alright, let's talk your field equipment. The stuff that every warfighter has on them to do their job, carry what they need, and hopefully be lethal and survive. Now, let's kick this off with the oldest kit of the bunch, your Alice kit. This stuff is descendant from the M56, the M67 field kit that Americans were using in Vietnam. The ammo pouches are definitely a direct descendant from the old M67 stuff. Now, each pouch, could hold 330 round mags of 5.56, so that would be your AR Stanag type mags. For paintball players, you can use these things for pods. As I've said, I've seen guys take these, they rig them up to be personal improvised IFAKs if they need to, but that's usually on the survivalist market, and that kind of stuff I'll discuss sometime down the road again. But generally speaking, this is essentially what most soldiers would carry. You would have 2 to 4 magazine pouches up front. That's 6 to 12 magazines on hand, ready to fight when you need it. You had 2 canteens, and if you were in Iraq, you probably wouldn't have the butt pack hooked up, but the butt pack was still an optional piece of kit for guys to be using. The suspenders, white harness was a standard. However, a lot of aftermarket stuff for the Alice system was easily found at military surplus right outside that main gate of any military base stateside. Families would be sending stuff over, or in case of a lot of paratroopers, which has been known since the 80s, a lot of the older guys that were paratroops in the days after Vietnam would still use the old H harness, even when the Y harness was a standard issue. So there is that. Same can be said for the Black Hawk butt pack. Black Hawk products at this time were coming in hard and fast to the military inventory, especially after 9/11. Soldiers and special ops teams are buying the stuff up faster than hell, so keep that in mind. As something like this, if you can get your hands on it, go for it. It is considered kosher, especially in that particular time frame. With that being said, another cool thing, camelbacks and hydration systems were becoming a big thing by the late 90s. Now, this one is an older camelback carrier. This one was private purchase military. The user, as you can see, early camelbacks that were not GI issued were all black. As give me 1 second to pull this bitch down. As you can see, this is what your original camelback hydration system looked like with the United States military, or these are private purchases by soldiers getting ready to ship out. This particular one, a soldier by the name of Morgan, he did what is called aftermarket field modification. He used this person used an old BDU jacket and made a camelback cover out of it. So this could be considered very kosher, especially for your special ops types who are going for something around the special forces look for this particular time period. Now, moving on. Let's swap this over. Now, the Alice system was being supplanted. We had your LBV-88 series. I'll get to that in a little while, in a couple minutes, but as far as general issue, this was the new generation of Deuce gear. This one is your Gen 1 Molly fighting load carrier. This was what was supplanting the LBV-88 system. This was supplanting the web gear. And as you can see, definitely a nice setup. This was set up to work with a backpack and whatnot, so take that into consideration when buying this. I did a review on this ages ago, but this is essentially your combination web belt and load bearing vest. You can hold a good deal of kit on here, but this one in particular, we were rigging this up to be for a rifleman or a machine gunner role because of the pods. This is before we even got more into mag-fed stuff, so keep that in mind. You've got an entire series of equipment that was GI issue at the time of this being the standard. This started life off as a prototype for the early Land Warrior system. All pouches that are paintball related on this are from RAP 4 or Modern Combat Sports, so I definitely would say check them out if you need some pouches for a hopper fed. But I digress. Solid vest. This was designed to be worn over body armor, so that's going to be coming up in a minute as far as interceptor stuff. And with that, we'll be moving on to another vest setup. Okay, next vest I want to talk about is your Interceptor. This was the Interceptor Outer Tactical Vest. This was the first modern plate carrier body armor system. It was two plates called the Small Arm Protective Insert, SAPI. Then you had your E-SAPI later on, but generally speaking, this was body armor that was replacing the Pasget flak vest as personal protection for infantry. Now, you were able to wear a vest like your Flick or Fighting Load Carrier over this body armor. Guys would wear their LBV-88 tactical vests over this thing, or even use the older Alice kit over this. You've got little snap epaulets up here to facilitate that. You've got Molly on here to allow for use with pouches and wear this as a standalone system. This was designed specifically as part of the early Land Warrior program and was part of an integrated fighting system. You'd have this, you'd have the Flick, you had your Camelback, then you had the Ruck. But when the Land Warrior was kind of put on the back burner with 9/11, however, this stuff, the Interceptor, the Flick, that stuff was becoming more standard issue. Even without the electronic components of Land Warrior, this is filling the inventory. Now, this setup that I have here is pretty much what your typical infantry soldier would carry. So, this is mixed and matched as far as gear goes, because this was, for me, an attempt to try to show the transition between the Alice gear and the Molly gear. You got Alice pouches on this side, you got Molly set up on here. These mag pouches, they came with my Molly 2 medic vests, which I'll be showing in a second. These could each hold two 30-round AR mags. You had provisions for a M67 frag grenade. You had a little utility pouch on here. These pouches would be used in the later Spear system, which was used by U.S. Special Forces, but that'll be a completely separate part for the written version of this article. And as you can see, common thing that grunts did, or any soldier would take their ankle head flashlights, they'd put them in where the grenade would go. You can do this on any of these kind of mag pouches, even the old school Alice pouches. But overall, this is a nylon body. You'd have Kevlar guts, and you'd have a ballistic plate in the front and in the back of here. Now, for all you guys that don't know, this would be a Gen 2 interceptor vest. This was still part of the run on interceptor vests, though this would be about your somewhere between 2004 and 2007, when it was being supplanted by other forms of plate carriers. So this was kind of an interesting part, though a lot of the stuff was in the inventory. You had this in woodland, you had this in 3-color desert, and later on your ACU digital camo. The Marine Corps, on the other hand, would be using this in woodland and 3-color early on, until they switched to solid coyote or tan everything when they went over to their digital camouflage. So there is that to consider when you're doing a setup like this. Though if you're going the Marine Corps route for later operations like Phantom Fury, Vigilant Resolve, it would be the tan versions of the Interceptor, and you can mix with woodland and 3-color pouches. So I'd say do your own research on that one. This is just a general premise video. But moving on to the last vest here, so give me 1 second. Alright, the last vest that we're going to be discussing is going to be my Mali Medic 2 vest. Now, this is an evolution off the LBV 88 Tactical Load Bearing Vest series. And for the early days of Global War on Terror, a lot of Army units had the LBV 88 in inventory, as well as the Marine Corps, but I think it was the Army that mainly had the LBV 88 as standard issue at this particular period. So let me give you a brief rundown on that vest, and we'll be moving on after that.
The Individual Integrated Fighting System, more commonly referred to as the LBV-88 Tactical Load Bearing Vest, had its origins during the Vietnam War, when studies were being conducted by Natick laboratories about how Americans used equipment, and this was considered to be a product improvement, if not a replacement candidate for the all-purpose lightweight individual carrying equipment, or Alice gear. Now, generally speaking, this thing initially had its rollout with U.S. Special Forces units as far as something that was lightweight, but it still allowed soldiers to have flexibility, ease of access to ammunition, and a few other things. However, one of the things that it retained from the Alice system was the ability to use the standard GI issue pistol belt that went with the gear. So they were able to attach various Alice pouches, particularly magazine pouches, canteen pouches, among others in the Alice lineup. So it allowed the individual soldier or operator to expand and further tailor the amount of firepower they have on hand for a particular mission. This vest had a lot of evolution over the years, as far as a Grenadier vest, which was nothing more than LBV 88 with pouches for the 40 by 46 millimeter low pressure grenades for the M203 or M79 and other standard NATO grenade launchers that were in use. However, this vest wasn't without its problems, particularly the retaining of body heat, which led to an enhanced LBV 88 with a mesh body, magazine pouches slanted to a 45-degree angle. The final evolution of this vest had its origins with the Land Warrior system as the medic vest was developed, which is almost direct influence from the LBV-88 family with the all-moly setup and a mesh body. However, because of the Molly on there, it allowed individual soldier to tailor it for more than that. I have done a full review on the Molly Medic Vest for anyone interested. I'll leave a link on that one. Other than that, this vest has gotten around and it's had a bit of a mystique thanks to Hollywood movies and the like, but that's more or less a story for another time.
Okay, sorry if that took a little longer than anticipated. You know how editing goes, and you know how I could give you painstaking details. Now, the Molly 2 Medic Vest, as it's also known, was a part of the early Molly gear lineup, particularly used for medics. Now, with that being said, they were going to use this as a medic vest until the flick was more standardized and approved. This was seen mainly as a overall improvement of the LBV-88. I doubt this was used by any mainline units in Iraq or Afghanistan. If any of you guys know about this, let me know. However, I would not be surprised if this was used by certain Special Forces members or certain Special Forces units on a whole, because its familiarity with the older generation LBV-88 is there. However, this is also allows the end user to modify this extensively. Use of both Alice gear with terms of pouches, canteens, and still use Molly pouches like I have this one set up for. Now, I got this one set up as my personal rig for MagFed. These pouches were a design that have been around since the late 90s, well into the 2000s. You can hold 3 30-round AR mags per pouch, or 2 30-round AK mags. You can hold the single paintball pod in here, or 2 20-round 68 caliber paintball mags. So fairly universal. I use this if I'm running between hopper or magazine fed, so there is that. And this is definitely set up for right into further global war on terror setup with the camelback hooked up into the back. You got the tank pouch, though this for paintball will be kosher. Other than that, if you're running airsoft, ditch it for a GWOT setup. The Woodland camelback carrier was around by somewhere between 04 and 06, so this would be kosher as well. Other than that, Woodland camo setup, definitely a thing that has staying power. Other serious thing, the holster. I'm running my TPX on a drop leg. Now, drop legs are good. These things were proven since the 70s, 80s, but with that being said, a lot of the hip-mounted stuff would be set up for older generation kit, but the leg mount was not really the best for vehicles, so a lot of guys would use hip or vest mounted systems. However, other than that, it was pretty much drop legs were more special forces, elite units, or some more conventional units, depending upon what branch, unit SOPs, and the like. Okay, what kind of backpacks were available to the American warfighter during the early period of global war on terror. Yeah, the Motley backpacks are beginning to come out. You've got sprinklings of them all about the place, but more often than not, this is going to be the last hurrah for the tried and true Alice packs. Now, this one in particular, I've had since high school. I've used it. I've backpacked out of it. I've gone camping with it. I've done paintball games with this shit. This thing held up and served me well big time. This one in particular is the medium Alice rucksack. And what you can tell is I'm not using a frame for it. It's got the provisions in here to work as a standalone, which is how it should be for most events. Now, a lot of the guys would keep these on their frames, and they'd hook these onto their Humvees. That way they can just hook the frames on to the vehicles. That way they know this shit ain't falling off for one reason or another. The other thing is this stuff, if they had to ditch the vehicle, they can just ruck up and get the hell out of Dodge. They had extra clothing, they had extra uniforms, medical gear, MREs, everything. This is pretty much their E&E bags if they had to abandon their vehicles during the drive to Baghdad. But it also worked for everything else too, so that's the reason why the Alice packs stayed in service for as long as it did. Now, let's look at something fun.
Developed by the late Dr. Eugene Stoner and Armalite, a division of Fairchild Aircraft at the time, the AR platform has become the American mainstay since the war in Vietnam and has continued on in multiple iterations as being the weapon of choice for the American military, both on the conventional and special operations side of the house. This weapon has evolved from everything from the M16, CAR-15s, to its later incarnations as the Mark 12 for close quarters work, up to what is today its best version ever. Now, pictured here is the M16A2. We used that in the early days until it got usurped by its little brother, the M4 carbine, to become the mainstay for the military in both Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. The M4, however, further evolved and developed, ultimately thanks to the guys at Heckler & Koch of Germany with the aid of Delta Force veteran Larry Vickers, became the 416. Utilizing a short-stroke gas piston system, the 416 has improved reliability and was used by SEAL Team 6 to kill Osama bin Laden in Pakistan during Operation Neptune Spear. Now, for the paintball side of the house, how can you build this thing? Well, out-of-the-box solution would be the U.S. Army Alpha Black, a 98 custom derivative. Very good in my opinion. I work with it. However, A5 fans will definitely like to gravitate toward the Tippmann X7. Pictured here is the X7 Classic with full M4/M16 parts. Just as a side note, all AR platforms for paintball are going to be modeled after the M4 carbine, just to let you know, such as pictured here, the Phenom. However, mag-fed options, you got the conversion kits like I've got here on my personal marker, or something a little more out of the box. You got your Tippmann TCMs, you've got your Milsig M17s, your Paradigm Pros, and the like, which also are First Strike compatible. Another one would be this MaxTac TGR2, definitely early attempt back in the day for MagFed, but ultimately lost favor to the other marker offerings from Milsig, later Tippmann, and others. First Strike, formerly Tiberius Arms, also makes a nice version, as does Modern Combat Sports, which is not pictured. However, you need a sniper model to build this one up. You got a lot of parts out there for what is either the SR-25 or the M110 semi-auto sniper system, developed by Reed Knight in conjunction with Eugene Stoner. This is the weapon system that put Knight's Armament on the map for your 7.62 by 51mm version of the AR platform, being the descendant of the AR-10. Built on the battle-proven G3 rifle, Heckler & Koch's MP5 submachine gun is, for all intents and purposes, a cultural icon. Made in multiple varieties to meet the needs for the operator. You can have fixed or retractable stocks, folding stocks, and the like, and comes in 3 different calibers. However, for our intents and purposes, 9x19 Parabellum is the caliber of choice. Now, developed for special forces and counterterrorism, this weapon rose to prominence in 1980 when being used by the British SAS during the Iranian hostage siege, which saw Pagoda Troop of 22nd SAS Regiment storm the embassy, capture one terrorist, and kill the rest, as well as a completely successful rescue of all hostages involved. Since then, any counterterrorism unit, special forces unit, and SWAT team would be remiss if they didn't have an MP5 in the arsenal. Now, for the U.S. military, chopper crews used it as a personal defense weapon, as well as other units would use it as what would be for Army Special Forces. As far as a company level goes, it would be used by the Commander's Interdiction Force, basically a specialized group of Tier 2 operators that rank underneath the Tier 1 guys like Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, but I digress. With that being said, this weapon was compact and is ideal for special operations that need to operate in a very low profile capacity, depending upon what kind of setup you're going for, either a K model, a short, or SD. Overall, it depends upon the mission set, but there's usually an MP5 to meet every need for the operator. Okay, pictured here are 3 different varieties of MP5 from your MP5K PDW, full-size A3, and an SD with retractable stock. We could build off from there. Now, pictured here is a Tippmann A5. This is the best one you can get for an MP5 setup because the A5 is built to look like the MP5K, and as we move on with the look, we got pictured here. I got a foam magazine attached, buttstock, and a flatline I'm using for a faux suppressor. This is what the A5 Stealth looks like, and definitely a good look for the MP5. But moving on, you got your classic Tippmann X7. If full size is your thing, the X7 does have you covered. As you can see, pictured here is what would look like as a full-size MP5 A3 type, but for stealth stuff, it's even got your SD capable look going down for it, which is always a fun thing to have. But if the Phenom is your thing, we got one pictured right here to show what you can do with it. However, there are other varieties out there, such as this one pictured here using T68 mags and HK setup for a mag fed. Here we go again on the Vortex, but if you need something other than a Tippmann, finding an old BT Delta would probably be your best bet, as it's kind of like a bastardization, but it definitely has what it takes to look like a pretty passable MP5 look. The FN Mini-Me, military designated M249 squad automatic weapon, chambered in the 5.56 by 45mm NATO cartridge, being able to feed from 200 round disintegrating belts or 30 round detachable box magazines. This weapon replaced the M60 as the automatic rifle in the infantry role, and it's been a mainstay since the 1980s, and during the global war on terror has undergone significant revisions and changes to make it more lethal and adaptable for the battlefield. Pictured here is the original version with the more solid stock from its European-made design. Next up, we've got the Parasol, developed for special forces and airborne military units with the retractable stock. This one was a godsend for Iraq with close-in urban combat in mind. Last one pictured here is going to be the SAW as it is today with the AR carbine retractable stock and a revised gas tube and handguard setup. Now, for paintball players, the A5 will fit for this particular kit as pictured here. You can use different stocks for it, just to let you know. Trigger wise, I'd go with the response trigger, or an E-trigger is also kosher for it. Next rifle we've got here is the M14 service rifle, shortest lived rifle in American history because combat conditions in Vietnam showed its shortcomings, and it was ultimately supplanted by the M16 family of weaponry. Now, the M14 still remained in second line service, but rose to prominence as a sniper and designated marksman rifle throughout Vietnam up into fairly recently, as far back as 2008, 2009 at least, being used as a sniper or designated marksman role. It was further evolved into, pictured here, the M14 Enhanced Battle Rifle. Select fire capability for urban combat as well as being an excellent battle rifle. This was able to reach out and touch somebody in Afghanistan. Now, for paintball players, pictured here, we got it on looks like an airsoft chassis, but it can be worked with, and definitely would see a guy like Eric Engler if you want an M14 built for you for paintball.
Alright, that does it for looking at the Special Forces look for the global war on terrorism. I know I tried to cover a lot in the time I have. Now, for any of you guys doing this as a cosplay, historical reenactment deal, you can find plenty of resources out there. This was just, as I said, scratch the surface and to get players interested on doing stuff like this. Now, you guys can catch a written version of this stuff over at outerheavenpaintball.blogspot.com. You could also check out my friends over at Acid Tactical at acidtactical.com. And if you need good kit, always check them out. Don't forget to hit up our Teespring shops for both of us. And with that being said, this is Big Boss. I'm out here.